Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session Cyber Threat Hunting and Intelligence and Internet of Things, IoT Environments. I'm Shilpa, and I'll be your host for the day. Now, we would like to go over a few house rules. For our attendees, the session will be in listen only mode and will last for an hour, out of which the last 10 minutes will be dedicated to Q&A. If you have any questions during the webinar to organizers or our speakers, use the Q&A window. Also, if you face any audio video challenges, please check your internet connections or you may log out and log in again. An important announcement for a certificate of attendance. Participants need to attend the complete webinar to qualify for the certificate. Also, should fill in the survey form which will be sent in the attendees thank you email and answer correctly the three multiple choice questions based on the webinar. The certificate of attendance shall be sent to you within the next 5 to 7 working days after the event. Our speaker for today's session, Dr. Ali Dik Antana, is an academic entrepreneur in cybersecurity and Canada Research Chair in Cybersecurity and Threat Intelligence at the University of Gulf, Ontario, Canada. He is the director of Cyber Science Lab and the founder and director of the Master of Cybersecurity and Threat Intelligence program at the University of Gulf. Now, without any further delay, I would hand over the session to you, Ali.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction, and it's great to be here presenting to the AC Council University audience. I'm going to talk today about the cyber threat hunting and intelligence in IoT environments, but a few notes before I start my presentation. Seeing the list of participants, I can see that we have people from the VP technology level up to security researchers and students joining this call. So I intentionally make my presentation in a way that there are some elements of a strategic level, a strategic views of threat hunting and intelligence in IoT environments. And then I'm going to deep dive on some more technologies that have been developed and built by us and tested in the environment. That could be a little bit technical and more suitable for the security researchers. All the technical solutions that I'm presenting today are available, the code of them are available, and I put the link to the paper that has the link to the GitHub and everything that we have the codes available there in the presentation slides. Plus, all these solutions are available for enterprise companies integrated with different SIEM solutions, with interfaces and everything. But I intentionally do not talk about these things in this specific presentation. I'm just keeping it vendor agnostic. So if anyone is interested to deploy or use these technologies that we're going to talk about today in the enterprise, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or just drop me an email. I'll be more than happy to provide the demo and support the integration with your environments. And for the security researchers who are more interested in terms of getting access to the libraries or the codes and the details of the solutions and the results that I'm presenting today, feel free to look into our paper and our GitHub and reach out to us, and we will be more than happy to provide the sources of all the application and system that I'm going to present today to the audience. A quick snapshot of myself. I am serving as a Canada researcher in cybersecurity and threat intelligence. I'm an associate professor in the University of Guelph as well, founder and director of the Master of Cybersecurity and Threat Intelligence program and the Cyber Science Lab at the University of Guelph. Before joining University of Guelph, and just a background for the audience, University of Guelph is around 70 kilometers west of Toronto, so we are like halfway between Waterloo and Toronto, just to give you some idea of where it is, right, in Canada. And before that, before the University of Guelph, I was serving as a senior lecturer in the University of Sheffield in the UK. And prior to that, I was with the University of Salford at Manchester, UK. Right, so before we get into the main parts of our talk, I always love to load this slide that shows the 5 levels of cybersecurity and make it clear of where we are and what is the scope of our talk. Then we look into cybersecurity in general, we can identify 5 different layers. The first layer is the secure architecture. That's the layer that we deploy technologies such as identity management, access control, all those fundamental technologies that are the basis for making any environment secure or monitoring that environment. At the next layer, we have the passive defense mechanism. These passive defense technologies are technologies such as firewall, such as IDS, that are passively sitting in the network or on your endpoints or on your, say, SIEM solutions. They're passively sitting there and raising alerts based on the signature that they have, or if they are machine learning based on the knowledge space of that AI engine or ML engine. So they're just passively sitting and raising alerts to the security analysts or to the end users, right? And try to stop the attacks that way. The next layer that we have are active defense technologies, right? These are the solutions that are enabling analysts to actively identify indications of compromise or identify the attackers' TTPs, tactic, technique, and procedures, and react accordingly, right? So everything that we have on the cyber threat hunting, most of the technologies around that are falling into this layer, the active defense layer technology, active defense layer. And the reason that I think this cyber community built a different term called cyber threat hunting instead of using active defense is active defense has its own implications in the, I mean, if you look at the legal text, it has its own definition and implication. To just not be confused, I would say the cyber threat hunting is a better term to be used when we are using and referring to active defense technologies in the cyber environment. So you would see me using the cyber threat hunting, but when we are referring to that, it's like very closely related to the active defense layer and active defense idea that we have in the cybersecurity. The next layer that we have is a threat intelligence or intelligence layer. That's where we have technologies. I mean, when I say technologies, I'm mainly referring to people, process, and technologies, right? All the enabling aspects that we have on that layer. But the main goal of that layer is to collect information from the adversaries and then leverage those informations on other tasks. Either it's passive defense or it's active defense, right? But the main thing that's happening on the intelligence layer is collecting the information from adversaries and try to use the adversarial information to stop attacks or to address the risk. And then the last layer that we have in cybersecurity is the offense. That's where security defenders, or I would say the red teams, are trying to target the attacker's infrastructure, or even it could fall into the domain of the law enforcement agencies when they try to seize the attacker's infrastructure and services. So that will be the offense layer that we have in the cybersecurity. Some loosely consider penetration testing and red teaming exercises as part of the offense. I am not referring to that as part of the offense, because when we talk about offense, the target of the offensive technologies should be attackers' environment and attackers' infrastructure. That in most of the pen testing exercises or blue red teaming exercises, that is not the case, right? So that's the difference I'm making there when we are looking at the offense layer. But looking at the cost benefits analysis, cost benefit of all these layers, and as you may know, that most of the companies are getting the best cost with the least cost. They can get the most benefit at the secure architecture layer. That's where we put like IoT management, etc., etc. And the more you go to the right side, the cost is increasing and the benefits would be tailored to the specific needs that the enterprise may have, and they may not widely providing wide values to the whole enterprise, right? So these are the layers that we have in cybersecurity, and I want to highlight that the scope of this talk today is mainly focused on active defense or cyber threat hunting and threat intelligence layer, right? We are aware of technologies that are enabler technologies or essential technologies in cybersecurity in other layers of architecture, passive defense or offense layers, but that's not the scope of the talk today. I am going to refer to some limitations of technologies, especially at the passive defense layer, but the assumption of this call is you already have the organization already have a robust and reasonable secure architecture that the other technologies that we're going to talk about are building upon. Just to complete the discussion around all those layers, the expectation of any enterprise is the secure architecture would be able to address the risk of script kiddies, those type of attackers that have little to no capacity to change the codes or write their own customized codes, then we are expecting that passive defense mechanism being very effective against cyber criminals. These are the groups or the people with some capacity to build customized payloads. However, they are mainly motivated by financial gains. So the rule of thumb when we deal with cyber criminals is if we are making our environments more secure than competitors or that others in the environment, we are probably reducing the risk to our organization. But then if we are dealing with funded hacking teams, meaning the teams or the groups that have enough funding to compromise specific targets, they would have enough time and resources to bypass the secure architecture and the passive defense mechanism that we have. And that's when we would need to have that threat hunting or active layer of engaging ourselves with adversaries that bypass the first two layers of the defense. So, and then if we are dealing with state-sponsored hacking teams, those hacking teams with much more resources and much more capabilities to deploy advanced evasion techniques or to act freely with no concern of being tracked or being legally responsible, then and at that level, we would need to rely a lot on our intelligence information because most of the techniques that those teams are using are not easily identifiable without having some clues of the tactic, technique, procedures beforehand, right? So I'm giving this picture to make it clear that when we look into threat intelligence and threat hunting, we are getting the most benefit if the organization is in the target of the funded hacking team or a state-sponsored hacking team. And if the organization is in the target list, the other layers of technologies are necessary but not sufficient at all. So if you think that your organization may be targeted by the funded hacking teams, then you definitely need to have a cyber threat hunting program in place and do the active defense, right, in your environment. And if your organization or data could be in the target of a state-sponsored hacking team, having the full stack of the hunting, intelligence, passive defense, and secure architecture would be necessary to receive to have a full-rounded cyber security, right? So with this background, let's jump into IoT security and views that you would normally get when you engage with IT security team members tasked to protect or to secure the IoT or ICS environment. And this is these things that you can see in this slide is the most common things or the most common comments that I receive when we are engaging ourselves in securing an IoT environment. And we receive these comments mainly from the IT security team. So for example, one of the suggestions that is very commonly given in IoT environment is to deploy an antivirus, right, on your IoT ICS network. Or the other suggestions that we hear a lot is changing default passwords or make passwords more complex or customized to your environment. And or patch your IoT ICS devices, and usually patch often, patch early, right? While all these concepts and these guidelines are very applicable and useful in protecting the traditional IT environments, you would see little to no benefits of using these and following these guidelines in an IoT environment. I am going to explore more and tell you the reasons that in reality we would not see these very beneficial in IoT environments and what we can do around that. First, AVs, antiviruses in ICS IoT. Well, that has been a source of selling some products in IoT ICS environment by vendors. And there are vendors out there that are claiming that their AVs solutions or the passive defense mechanism solutions is scanning the IoT ICS devices periodically and try to identify the attacks or potential attempts of compromise in the environment. But what you would normally see, and that's when you deep dive in these products, is most of these AVs or AV-like solutions are not actually scanning the ICS or OT part of your network. They are mainly scanning the IT part of your environment, say the Windows device that is serving as the main point to monitor those ICS IoT environments. And there are a few reasons for that. First, when you check the manual or guidance of the vendors that are producing these IoT ICS devices, such as say health monitoring devices, such as say temperature controlling devices, air pressure controlling devices. One of the things that you see commonly mentioned there is they are not recommending any third-party scan of their device, of their environments. Even some vendors are taking it so strict that if you are running any third-party scan on their devices, they are voiding the warranty, right? That's one of the main reasons or main drivers that you will see that most of these AV solutions are trying not to touch, not to scan OT part of the environment, OT part of the enterprise that you have. In addition, most of the enterprise organization, especially if they are acting in a critical or sensitive functions, they try to avoid running any scan against their devices because availability is the first and the most important factor most of the time in ICS IoT devices, and any scan at any time could cause some unintentional behavior or results of the device and make the device unavailable. And that's the other reason that you will see most of these AV solutions out there are not protecting the ICS portion. And even I have seen companies and enterprises acquiring solutions that have the capability to scan the ICS OT part of the network, but they are not actually deploying them and use them in production for the reasons I mentioned, like the possibility of voiding warranty or the possibility of impacting the device in the way not intended. That's the reason that you see the AV-like solutions benefit is very limited in IoT ICS environments, and you usually get very little benefits if you're using that kind of technologies in IoT OT networks. The next myth that we have in protection of the IoT OT environments is try to have unique complex passwords for accessing different devices in your environments. And while on the surface or on the paper, this sounds like a good solution or something that we must have, when you go in practice, in reality, you would see that risk of using a unique complex password is, for most of the organization, is way more than the risk of having a device unavailable and then the administrator cannot remember the passwords or the vendor cannot remotely connect the device to help. So most of the organization are finding the risk of making the device unavailable or forgetting the passwords or not enabling the vendor to remotely connect and help them in handling the device much more than the risk of having a password shared between different devices or an easy to guess passwords because most of the time, and I will discuss this more in the future slides, you will see that most of the time, most of the attacks against IoT environments would not make any changes in an enterprise risk posture. So it's not increasing the enterprise risk level, right? So when we look into it from that point of view, and what I saw in practice is most of the organizations prefer to keep the passwords either shared or something easy, or even the default password provided by the vendor or the password that is changed by the vendor, right? To not risk the possibility of not being able to get access to the device, right? That's the reason that you will see that deploying and implementing unique passwords or complex passwords on IoT OT environment is not easy, especially when you talk about organizations that have a lot of IT OT nodes and you're going to manage a lot of those nodes distributed in different places all around the globe, right? That become kind of impractical that you want to have unique passwords, right? Or even sometimes I have seen organizations trying to deploy one-time passwords access on their OT part of the system. That works way better. But again, I have seen that in a time of crisis or at a time of emergency, being able to communicate that one-time password to the vendor or to those who needs to get access to the device is sometimes increasing the response time of the organization And some organization even consider to just set that aside and accept the risk of having the passwords shared or reuse the same passwords on different devices, even if you have like the one-time password or that kind of solutions implemented in the enterprise, especially for the OT part. All the discussion today is on the OT part of the network that we have. So you can see that in most of the cases, using unique password is actually exposing the organization to more risk than just having the shared password or the easy to guess passwords on the organization. And the third thing, IoT ICS patching curse. I haven't came across any organization that I am dealing with and we are doing the risk assessment for them. That when we conduct a risk assessment, they accept the risk of automated patch or automated update on their OT environments. What I have seen most of the time is happening is that clients or organizations are having a part of their network, it's called the test network. They first deploy the patches there, let the patches run there for some time, and then gradually implementing patches on all other places of the network. And the main reason for that is most of the time, predicting the possible consequence of applying a patch and taking the risk that you may apply a patch that could cause malfunction of some devices, and then you need to retrace it, retrack it back, is so hard for most of the organization that they won't take it, right? So we cannot simply deploy the automated patching policy in most of IoT ICS environments. That's one of the biggest reasons that we are not seeing much adoption on the automated patching policy on the IoT part. The second reason is most of the time when we are dealing with the IoT OT patching, it is not even clear who should develop or who should create that patch, right? So for example, if you look at the Black Energy Tree attack that happened like a few years back in 2015, I guess in Ukraine, attackers were targeting a vulnerability on a Moxa import device that were providing the Ethernet access, right? And that Moxa import was provided by the Moxa company, but then the vulnerability was on a chipset that chipset was provided by Lantronix, another company called Lantronix. So the big question back then was, who should actually come with the patch? Is it Lantronix or is it Moxa? And if it is Lantronix, is this vulnerability accessible in all different deployments of the Lantronix chipset, or it is only accessible when it is used on the Ethernet connectors, and whether it is like in all Ethernet connectors or only on Moxa devices, right? So it was just a mess to just identify who should come with the patch, set aside to just deploy, develop the patch and release it out. That's the reason that you will see that, for example, on those specific cases, there were like third parties or the security companies that they try to not patch the vulnerability, but come with solutions around about that weakness and address it in another way, because patching has many issues. First, they said the automated deployment or automated releasing of the patch is not easy task. And second is, it is not most of the time clear who should come and patch the environment, right? Considering all these things, plus one more point that 90%, 90% of ICS vulnerabilities do not increase organizational risk. Dale Peterson has conducted a very fantastic research out there. If you just search his name and put like Dale Peterson research in S4 in Google, you will see his paper on that. He has conducted an in-depth analysis and find that 90% of ICS vulnerabilities do not increase organizational risk at all. So that means most of the time, if you have even the devices with default passwords, and even you assume that the attackers got access to that device, say through an HMI port, and even has the root privilege on PLC, even when you consider those kind of scenarios, if the attacker cannot jump from that specific device to other parts of the network, or cannot get access to any private information through its root privilege access on the device, it is not changing the organization risk at all, risk profile at all, right? So one of the first steps that any organization should take when they are thinking about IoT ICS security is to conduct a proper risk assessment to identify that 10% or the remaining 10% of ICS IoT devices that actually need to be protected. And if there is any vulnerability or any compromise, make changes on the organization risk profile, right? So that's the first step that you need to consider. There is another point to be considered whenever we are going to secure the IoT ICS environment, and that is the very low chance of creating an exploit or an attack that can be reused and it is stable, persistent on an IoT OT environment. Again, if you look into this diagram, the chance of or the probability of being able to build a high confidence, repeatable, successful attack with re-attack option is very low. It's extremely difficult in IoT OT environments that the attackers are able to build such exploits. That refers back to my previous comments that not 90% of the vulnerabilities in IoT ICS environments are not changing the organization risk profile and can be easily accepted and monitored by the organization. And there is no need to come with any mitigation or detection strategy around that, right? So when you put these two together and you conduct a proper risk assessment, you would find that most of the devices out there do not really change, that doesn't make any impact on the organization risk profile and doesn't need, and the risk of them can be easily accepted. However, talking about all these limitation or specific criteria that we have in IoT OT environments, there are some characteristics that make these environments easy to protect. You know, when you are dealing with an IT environment, one device may be responsible to conduct many tasks, load different applications, support different users, so on and so forth. But when you switch your attention to the OT environment, you would find that most of these devices are specifically designed for a special task. So the tasks or the activities that they do are very predictable, and they are going to do that for a very long time. So this makes them a very good candidate for AI or machine learning based detection or protection solutions, right? So you could train machine learning agents to learn the normal behavior, and then anything out of norm can be considered as an IOC or IOA and would be investigated further, right? So that seems to be the best potential, and considering that the number of these IoT devices are quite significant, being able to leverage machine learning would give us the benefit of hunting in scale, right? So we have conducted several studies to see whether there are features of IoT OT environments that can be used for training machine learning algorithms, and we can see differences, significant differences between the status or the value of those features in normal versus abnormal applications. So in this slide, this is not about OT environment. This is like the ransomware's behavior in normal IT environments. So what we looked into as the first characteristics was um, the different libraries that the ransomwares versus normal applications are calling. And as you can see, there is clear differences between ransomware versus goodware libraries that they are calling in the normal environments, in the IT environments. And even when you look into the different families of ransomware, I just put some samples here, right? You can see that even the different families of ransomwares are having different patterns of different behaviors and calling different libraries. So we can use these characteristics to not only identify the ransomwares, but even identify the family of those ransomwares. So this is like a 3D view of the same thing that I just explained there. And as we can see, there are like visible differences, right? Based on the libraries that the ransomwares are calling. And if you pass this to a machine learning agent, and it could be like just a basic vanilla machine learning agent, train that, right? So you can see that you can get a very high accuracy when you are conducting the detection. So the results that you can see here are just passing the features that I told you the library calls to the, I think, scikit-learn implementation, default scikit-learn implementation of these algorithms. The LSTM were just 3 layers of LSTM. I think it's just 3 layers of LSTM. And as we can see, we get very good accuracy. So it is very possible that we may have features that are distinguishable between malicious actors' behavior and normal behavior, even in IT environments, and we can extend that to some degree to OT environments. I'm going to look into them in the next slides and use them for detection. But when you are going to build any hunting solution or any intelligence solution, we need to always consider the pyramid of pain. We need to look into the solutions that are using the features that are difficult to change for the attackers. You know, the library calls or the sequence of calling libraries or sequence of calling specific functions is not that difficult to be changed by the attacker. So if we use that kind of technologies for the detection, it would be kind of simple or easy for the attackers to change, right? But if we can build solutions that are on higher levels, trying to identify tactics, techniques, and procedures of the attackers when they are targeting an environment, changing those would be very tough for attackers. So I'm going to show you the solution that we have and the way that we have built it gradually over time and what it does to identify and to do the hunting based on tactics, techniques, and procedures of the attackers in OT networks. So when we look into the features or characteristics that can be used for identifying and detecting the attacks, and those characteristics being difficult enough that is not easy to change by the attackers, the first characteristic that we started looking at it was the power consumption pattern of the devices. So as you can see on the top left here, this is the power consumption of one of the OT devices we were analyzing when they were dealing with the malware. That was actually a ransomware, right? Environment. No, it was like, sorry, it was not a ransomware, it was a C2, right? That was a malware that was creating a C2 connection, right, to the server, and these changes on the power consumption behavior were happening when the C2 connections were made. And comparing that with the normal behavior, normal power consumption behavior of a device, you can see that there is like big differences between these two, right? But of course, if you are going to use these and pass it as a feature to a machine learning algorithm, you would need to have the streams of the data pass between the device and to the machine learning algorithm and monitor them all the time. That is not possible in most of the cases. So we have used a technique called subsampling, like sample grinding, that we identify what are the characteristics or what are the events that happen that trigger changes in the power consumption pattern. And then we use those events as the criteria to identify when we should start monitoring or subsampling the power consumption pattern of the device, and then use that to train a KNN algorithm. And as we can see, only using the power consumption patterns and subsampling the environment, which means you are not monitoring it 24/7, but you are monitoring as it is required, as we see specific events happening on the environment, we could achieve a good accuracy of 94.27%, right? You may say that 94% is not very good, right? And of course, this is only one view that we have in the system. So one of the views that we use in our solution to identify the attackers and hunt for the attackers is the pattern of power consumption. But that's not the only view that can be used to identify the attackers. The next thing that we are monitoring is the opcodes, right? The sequence of opcodes as they appear in the memory of the device. So we're dumping the memory of the devices, extract these opcodes that are happening in that are passed to that are appearing in the memory, right? And then use that to train a deep neural network algorithm, and we could achieve a very high accuracy when we were monitoring the opcodes in identifying different malwares. As you can see here, for example, with the two-layer LSTM, we achieved 98% accuracy for identifying the attackers based on the pattern of opcodes. So far, we had two engines, one that was using the power consumption patterns and the other one that was using the opcodes, sequence of opcodes for identifying the attackers. The next layer and the next layer of our technology is using the network traffic, right? The data that you can see, and that's just the network header information, not the payload information, right? So we look at NetFlow data, and this was north-south traffic only, not the east-west traffic of the organization, and see whether we can identify features on that kind of traffic that can be used to identify potentially compromised devices. And again, we have achieved a very high accuracy of, I can see here, 95.25% when we were using the STM model with 3 layers to identify the potentially compromised nodes. And the next step, what we did was we created a multi-kernel and multi-feature algorithm or engine that is able to identify attackers' activities in IoT environments from all these different views, right? So we get all these views from the power consumption, from network layer, from opcode layer, train a range of different machine learning algorithms, and use the combination of them with a decision support system to identify what events warrants investigation, right? So when you are using this specific system, it provides many benefits. First, it is very difficult for an attacker to bypass a detection on all these layers at the same time. I mean, even if they attempt to just bypass it at the like opcode layer, we will catch them on network traffic or on power consumption, right? And even we were training our engine with different machine learning algorithms. So even if they know that we are using machine learning algorithm, they don't know which algorithm or which technique or which combination of the algorithms are used for detection at that point of time, right? So by passing this algorithm, even knowing what algorithms are used, even having some internal information from the environment was extremely difficult. So at the next step, we were challenged by a defense organization that we build a system that is very lightweight. So we use that system that we already have to build a system that is very lightweight, so it can be deployed on Internet of Battlefield of Things devices. Devices are used by the soldiers on the battlefields, playgrounds, right, that they have. That was one criteria. They should be quite lightweight, the lightest that we can. Plus, we need to make sure that the environment, that the system that we have is providing some degree of robustness against evasion and adversarial attacks, right? These are the type of common attacks that you see used by the adversaries to bypass machine learning based solutions, right, that are used for detection and protection. So we had these two aims in mind, that we are going to make it very light, the lightest that we can, and then make it robust against evasion and adversarial types of attacks. And what we built was, we were using the deep Asian space learning environment. So I'm not going to the details of these things, you're getting very technical, right? But those of security researchers who are interested, that you can refer to the papers, or you can just reach out to us and we'll be more than happy to provide the codes to you, right? But using the Asian space estimation techniques that we have, we could build a solution that was quite lightweight. It could just run on very, very light environments, right? You can see the testing of this on specific devices in this paper. But more importantly, it provides a very high degree of robustness against junk code insertion attacks. So which means if the attackers were trying to insert junk codes on their malwares and targeting devices that we have, that would not degrade our accuracy that much. As you can see, even 30% junk code insertion didn't make much difference, as we still had 99% accuracy in terms of detecting, close to 99% accuracy in terms of detecting it. And then to identify to overcome the adversarial opcode insertion attacks, right? So like there are two main techniques here that are used by adversaries: code insertion and code swapping. So we had the junk code insertion detected on the previous layer with the deep Asian space models that we have. And then we wanted to identify whether they are just swapping the codes or injecting real codes inside the system, not the junk codes, and how we can do that. We have built and we have used a Mahalanobis based estimation technique, and that could give us a very clear distinction between the attackers versus the normal activities of the device at the code level. Again, the details of that in this paper. I'm just referring to the audience to read that paper, and the codes are available there. But using the Mahalanobis estimation and then the deep neural networks, we achieved a very high accuracy, as you can see there, right, at different K levels that we have in identifying the adversarial attacks. So even adversaries trying to actively swap the codes or inject the real codes on their samples and send it to our targets, still our model was able to identify and detect them. So these are the range of threat hunting techniques available at the moment, and I would say they're like some of the state-of-the-art technologies you can see here in IoT environments, not only identifying and taking attackers from one single point, but from all different viewpoints, and we were trying to make them very lightweight and robust against the adversarial attacks to identify different IT/OT environments. However, with all these attempts, still IoT devices are at high risk. Our main motive is starting to doing this work in IoT OT environment was this statement from ABC News in 2011 that at one point the penetration into US Chamber of Commerce was so complete that the chamber thermostat was communicating with the computer in China. Another time, chamber employees were surprised to see one of their printers printing in Chinese. So you can see this was a challenge that was in the environment, was in the enterprise for quite a long time, and we are still building new solutions there. And that's a growing risk as we are seeing more and more intelligent IoT, OT devices deployed in the environments. And ours is one of the solutions that can be out there available to enterprise and security researchers. Thank you for your attention, and I'm passing it back to the Shilpa for the next steps.
Thank you very much, Ali, for the informative session, and our attendees share the same sentiments. Uh, Now, if you're interested to learn more about our programs, do let us know in the poll that's going to be conducted now. Let us know your preferred mode of training, and we will reach out to you. So, Dr. Ali, shall we start with the Q&A?
Sure, of course.
Okay. So, our first question is, can AI completely eliminate human intervention in threat hunting and threat intelligence?
Um, hmm, if your question is about the possibility of that, everything is possible. If the technology can get to a level that we can build a general AI, which is an AI solution that can work with all types of data, right, and make decisions, then yes, everything is possible, right? But I would say when we are at that advanced level of technology, many of these attacks that we are talking about now are not even applicable, right? So I would say I don't see that possibility in the near future. Most of the time, these ML-based, AI-based solutions are just another point of reference for the decision makers. They are really helpful in reducing the response time. They are really helpful in suggesting some actions that needs to be taken to the human beings, but still, the final judgment should be made by a human, and I don't see that the critical role of human would be removed anytime soon, especially in threat hunting environments.
Thank you so much for answering that question. Next question is by Mihail. What if the attacker adds dummy instruction in order to randomize the power consumption?
Exactly, right. That was why we were suggesting a solution that includes multiple views, right? So we were looking at the power consumption as one point of reference, right? There were like opcodes, they were network traffic, all of them were monitored with multiple ML engines, and then a decision support system that is on top of them would make a decision that whether there is enough reasons to believe that this activity is out of norm, right? And alerts the analyst. And that should be the case for in all technologies, right? You cannot have a technology relying on one specific view or one specific aspect, especially if it is an ML-based solution, because most of the time the ML-based solutions are getting overfitted on the feature that they have been trained with. So if you are relying on that single feature, first, it will be very easy for the attackers to evade that specific feature. Second, you will be missing the attacks that are not impacting that specific feature that is used by that ML algorithm, right? So that's the rule of thumb that whenever I work with organization and they are going to acquire any new solution, I'm advising them that if it is ML based, think about and ask about the range of features that ML is using for making that decision. If it is a single feature or like the features that are correlating with each other, right? Then that's not a good solution, right? So for example, most of the time the sequence of opcodes are correlated with the library calls that we have. So if it is using both library call and sequence of opcodes, these are correlated features and can't be used to and can be easily evaded and cannot be a good solution, right? For putting in.
Thank you for answering that question, Dr. Ali. Our next question is by Carl. Could you speak to defense in depth where you would implement machine learning to detect IOC in an OT environment along with proper network segmentation?
Sorry, can you repeat it? Can we do that, or that was the question?
I, I'll repeat.
Yeah.
Could you speak to defense in depth where you would implement machine learning to detect IOC in an OT environment along with proper network segmentation?
Sure. Mm, Machine learning solutions can contribute to different layers, right, of security. If you recall, my very first slide was actually showing the different layers that we have in cybersecurity. And when we deploy a defense in-depth solution, we need to have all those layers: secure architecture, passive defense mechanisms, active defense, etc., etc. But do I advise that in all these layers we should use machine learning technologies? I don't. You know, even the best ML solution, ML-based solution that we deploy would have some degree of false positive, false negative, some degree of uncertainty, right? So you should not use ML-based solutions at the layers that you are looking for making a black or white type of decision, right? So if it is like you are authenticating an identity, either the user password is right or not, right? So it's like completely a signature, right? If you go to most of the passive defense layer solutions, they are mostly signature based. The vendors may claim that they are using different AI technologies, but when you deep dive into that, they are eventually at the end of the day have some signatures that they feed to the AI, and AI is just looking for those signatures. And if that is not the case, if it is not the signature based, that would generate a lot of false alerts, right? So you need to be very careful when you are deciding to use AI in your defense in-depth strategy, right? You need to be careful not using AI on the layers that or normal technologies should give us the best results, and limit the usage of the AI on the layers that we are dealing with some degree of uncertainty. When you are doing hunting, AI could give benefits, right? When you are going to process the intelligence feeds and create like super feeds or create some estimation of the attacker's next best move or some risk assessment, risk estimation, AI could be helpful there, right? So whenever, that's the rule of thumb. Whenever you in the environment you have uncertainty or you're going to make decisions based on uncertain facts, that's when AI can contribute as a point of reference. But if it is not the case, if it is just decision based on a signature, then no, do not use AI-based solutions, right? So answering your question, right? If you're having IOCs that are deployed on your, say, uh, IDS, right, on any passive defense mechanism that you have, you won't need to think about AI, right? Just get IOCs, deploy them there, and you can just have a simple matching that are many solutions out there, right, to identify those attacks, right? Because even if you feed IOCs to the AI will be overfeed and will be act as a signature detection-based technology, right? So that's just based on money, based on resources, right? But if you are going to use IOCs as one point of reference to train an AI solution, say that's a natural language processing solution that looks at those IOCs and try to identify those IOCs in your log files, yes, that's great. That's a great use of AI, right? So you need to be careful on how you are using it and where you are putting it and manage your expectation of that AI deployment, right? That's one of these things that we should be very careful that when they are dealing with the vendors and having AI-based solutions, make sure that they are deploying it on the right place for the right task. Otherwise, you are increasing the TCO, total cost of ownership, significantly. I hope I answered your question.
Thank, yeah. Thank you so much for answering that question. Next question is by Rajan Jha. What should be ideal security controls infra for OT devices security?
Sorry, can you repeat?
What should be ideal security controls infra for OT devices security?
Ideal security controls. That is hard to identify. That totally depends on your risk assessment, right? As I said, the first step before even thinking about the technology or the controls is to conduct a risk assessment, identifying the devices or the portions of your IoT OT networks that needs protection, right? And then based on that, we could define the controls that are necessary for protecting those devices, right? Or, most of the time I have seen that protection technologies are not very effective in OT environments, right? Because most of those devices supposed to be widely accessible, right? So protection technologies may not be the best way to start designing your security program in OT environment. I would most of the time recommending that first start from the detection and hunting layer, see what are the different risks that you can address, you can put the controls for them with the hunting and detection, and then think about at the next layer that is it reasonable to assume we are able to have a preventive control that can do the same thing or not. Most I mean the issue with the preventive controls in OT environment is most of the time, if the attackers are aware of the preventive control that you have, they might be able to define a kind of DOS attack, a denial of service attack, or an attack scenario that make that device unavailable using your preventive technology, right? So you need to be very careful because most of these devices are physically accessible or are widely distributed geographically. So you need to think about the specific type of attacks that you're addressing with preventive technology and make sure that that preventive technology cannot be leveraged by the attackers to make the device unavailable, right? Most of the time, these are the kind of consideration that you should give before deciding about the set of controls that you have. So I cannot prescribe any set of controls, but I can tell you that it is better to start with those hunting detection type of controls first, then think about the preventive controls, right? And understand when you're dealing with a vast OT network.
Thank you so much for answering that question. Next question is by George. Is it advisable to set up the system in such a way that passwords are forced to be reset every 90 days to prevent hacking?
Uh, I assume, George, your question is limited to the OT environment, right? Um, if you want, I can comment on the IT part as well. But no, I'm not recommending to do these things unless that you are pretty sure about the risk that you are taking. Changing passwords on the OT devices, OT environments would need a lot of coordination. You need to coordinate that with your vendor. You need to coordinate that with the device users, device supervisors, right? And I find that sometimes when the central IT is making such policies mandatory, when a disaster, when an issue happens, the supervisor on the field can't remember the password, the device becomes unavailable, the vendor cannot help, and that causes a much more significant risk in compared with just having a fixed password there and trying to address the risk at other layers, right? So when you are thinking about that, you need to ask the question that does it really change your risk profile if an adversary get access to a specific device, a specific sensor that you have, or it would not make any significant or any impactful changes unless they can jump the higher layers of your network. If they can jump, is it best to protect it at a device level or at the pivot point, right? So these are the considerations that you should give. And I can tell you based on my experience, most of the time we try to monitor the pivoting attempts or pivoting activities in OT environments. When the pivot is happening, it is almost always malicious, and that was an investigation, detection, response, all those things, right? But we are seeing a lot of intrusion or a lot of successful compromises happening at the device level, and we are just ignoring it in the real world because we are not changing the risk profile of the organization in the level that we cannot accept it.
Thank you for answering that question. I'll take last two questions for the day. Next question is by Carl. Does machine-based learning in IoT environments have applications for detecting threats before the exploitation of a device?
Yes, they do. As I showed you some of the solutions that we have, like when you are monitoring opcodes, right? So if you have the exploits, and you know that, and most of these machine learning agents, especially if you use fuzzy machine learning agents, they can be trained with the fuzzy representation of the opcodes. So even if there are deviations on the pattern of the exploits or exploit codes, they can easily detect them, right? So your exploit, whatever it is, would eventually translate to some opcodes that needs to be executed, needs to be handled by the device. So yes, there are the machine learning solutions could be very, very useful there, right? So if you are looking at the data in the memory in general and specifically opcodes, if you want to have a solution at that layer, if your organization needs to have a solution at that layer, the best type of solutions are machine learning based solutions for two reasons. First, uh, it is difficult for a human to analyze that level of the data, of course level, memory level information. And there are very few resources, few people out there that can do that kind of things. And they demand a very high salary, those who can do that, right? And second is, most of the time, at least so far, the memory, the size of memory of IoT, OT devices are still very limited. So there are solutions out there that we can always page the memory of the devices in almost real time and keep monitoring them and then dump them, right? So even the solution is not in line. So it's just getting a copy of the memory, a page of the memory with some delays. Usually the delay is a few seconds. That is like acceptable in most of the scenarios. And then it passes to machine learning, and machine learning just make a decision right away, right, on those. So those will be the kind of situations that you can detect all the exploits, right? Even and if you mean before executing, if your organization cannot take even the few seconds delay, one solution would be to uh, to reroute the memory through your detection scenario first before passing it for the execution. That is not easy to implement, but I have seen in some environments, in like nuclear power stations, some organizations even took it that far, right? So even all the opcodes are first paged, are first dumped, right, before even passing for any kind of execution, right? And that will be the way around it.
Thank you, Ali, for answering that question. Our last question is by Sabina. What is the best way to protect our network from compromising through IoT devices?
I mean, I indicated several times, right? I would say the best way is to focus on the pivoting activities, right? Almost all OT level attacks at some stage should pivot themselves to your IT network or to like supervisory network that you have in the OT environments. So the best way to protect yourself on those is to build solutions or acquire solutions that are very focused on that pivot layer, right? And when the pivoting action is happening, that's the time that you got to give a response, right? A quick response to those activities.
Thank you so much, Ali, for answering that question. And thank you again to our wonderful speaker, Dr. Ali, for answering those questions and for the great presentation and knowledge shared with our global audiences. It was a pleasure to have you with us, and we are looking for more and more sessions with you. Before we conclude the webinar, Dr. Ali, would you like to give a message to our audiences?
Oh, thank you everyone for attending this talk. Feel free to reach out to me anytime with any questions that you may have, and we are more than happy to provide support necessary, especially in OT environments. And wish you all the best. Have a good long weekend. Enjoy North America.
Thank you so much for the message to our audiences. Before we end the session, I would like to announce our next CyberTalk session, the do's and don'ts of API security, which is scheduled for June 1st, 2022. This session is an expert presentation by Merlin Biom, Senior Vice President and Director of Enterprise Information Security Xeon's Band Corporation. To register for this session, please do go and visit our website www.eccu.edu cybertalk. The link is given in the chat section. Hope to see you all on June 1st. With this, we end the session and you may now disconnect your lines. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Ali. It was nice having you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.